I'm Michael Bungay-Stanya. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the blather and the BS and the noise to find the good stuff that works in change. If you're a transformational leader and you are seeking modern change mastery, this is where we light the candles, celebrate success, and then blow the candles out with gusto. Change Signal is 1 year old. Yay! I'm going to celebrate that. And I really want to share with you how my change thinking has evolved over the last year. I mean, I've found new language to describe the experience of change. And when I've shared it with people, I've got both people nodding their heads going, exactly, but also smiling and laughing a little. So I think you might enjoy that. I've named for the first time the 3 pillars of what I think modern change mastery require. And honestly, they're not what I was expecting. And finally, I've tinkered with the model that I started with in mind when I first began this project. And I began this project 4 years ago. I had this idea for a model. I still think it's a good idea, but I've also made quite a few changes and fine-tuning to it to make it really work. So here we go. This is quite a visual episode, at least my language is quite visual. So you might want to grab a pen and paper. That might be helpful for you. And also, just to say, after this paragraph, it's not scripted. I'm kind of moving into keynote mode. I've given this keynote or extended versions of this as a keynote quite a few times now. It seems to be landing with people. So here we go. Change Signal 1 year on. What have I learned? Let me tell you what drives me nuts about change management and what I think is a far better alternative, which is modern change mastery. All right, change management. I mean, it is a tired phrase. And do we even know what we're managing? Is it even possible to understand change management? It feels so 1970s. And in fact, when you look at the big consultancies, they're not that much more encouraging. I mean, McKinsey, for 4 decades, has been saying 70% of all change initiatives fail. They said that 40 years ago. These days, they're still saying 70% of all change initiatives fail. I mean, I don't know what they're selling, but it's not working particularly well. That said, that is a better number than some of their competitors. I mean, I saw a study from Bain that said 88% of change initiatives fail, which sounds terrible unless you compare it to their other research that says 95% of digital transformations fail. So whatever change management is, whatever our current approach to this, it's clearly not working. And as part of the Change Signal podcast and talking to people, both thinkers and practitioners, what I'm learning is that the people who are making a difference, the people who are having some success, they're actually thinking about 3 really powerful different things, different drivers, foundations of modern change mastery. And I want to get into that, but in just a moment, because before I go there, I want to just test with you, and I'm going to be curious. I'd love you to kind of email me and let me know how you respond to this, a way of explaining the experience of people, you and the people in your organization have in going through change. And in some ways, you can imagine a bell curve because, in the end, everything's a bell curve. And I'm taking inspiration a little bit from The Bear. Now, you may know The Bear TV series. It's had some popularity in recent years. It tells the story of a startup kitchen in Chicago going from selling hot dogs to trying to be a better kitchen and the function and dysfunction of that experience. It's really great TV drama. So inspired by that, I want you to imagine a bell curve. Let's give it a scale between 1 and 10. 1 is low, 10 is high. And let's talk about the 4 different broad experiences that you and the people in your organization might have as they go through change. So let's say 1 to 3, right at the bottom end. 1 to 3 is like, it's a kitchen fire. It's terrible. There's fat on the floor, things are aflame, people are getting stabbed with knives, the chef is locked in the freezer, there's no food going out, or at least the food that's going out is either burnt or it's raw. The wait staff have all quit. There aren't any customers because they're having a terrible time, or the ones that are there are grumbling and it's a nightmare. It's basically a complete disaster. It is as dysfunctional and as broken as you can imagine it might be. It's a real struggle to be there. And clearly this is, I'm hoping very few of you have this experience currently, and I'm hoping that very few have had that experience in the past. But that's the starting place, which is like, oh, it's bad. It's bad. It's like there's rot, there's mildew. You can imagine Gordon Ramsay walking in and going, "This is an effing disaster." It's kind of that type of experience. 1 to 3. 4 to 5, I'm going to call this the fast food experience. And no doubt you've been to one of the fast food chains. And the good side of that is you're going to get some calories and they're going to be okay. It's not a terrible, terrible way to eat. But if you're getting that food experience, you're not ordering a delicious plate of food, you're ordering a number off the menu. So you're pretty much a number in the process. And the people behind the counter, they're just delivering on the number. And the calories are there, but there's a bit too much sugar and there's a bit too much salt and there's a bit too much fat, and it's okay as an occasional one-off, but you don't want to make this your steady diet. And it's scalable in a way for sure, but it is also dehumanizing. It is a kind of non-human experience to kind of go get your food from the fast food. So we're going to call that 4 to 5. It's okay, you get some calories out there, it's got a process, it's not a disaster, there aren't fires in the kitchen. The freezer works and it's clean, but it's not a superhuman experience. 6 to 8, and now things are getting quite interesting. We're going to call this the local trattoria restaurant, your favorite local Italian restaurant. And I hope you have one because it's a great experience, right? When you go to your local Italian restaurant, they might know you at the door.
Let me show you to your table.
The table has a tablecloth, maybe a candle, a Chianti bottle. It's a menu you know and like. They do a pretty good bowl of pasta. The garlic bread's a bit dated. It's a bit 1970s garlic bread, but it's okay. And as nourishing as this can be, because it can be a warm and nourishing experience, you're not really showing up at your local trattoria going, I wonder how they're adapting to the seasonal ebb and flow of the food. It's the same menu they've had since 1963. It's the same tablecloths they've had since 1963. That Chianti bottle has been there since 1963. So it is a trusted experience. It's good food. It's filling. It's nourishing. But it's good enough. Make no mistake. I mean, as metaphor, if the experience of change you're bringing your people or the experience of change you've had, you could call the kind of a local trattoria experience, then well done you. Like, that's no small thing. Let's not diminish what that means. But there's more. There's a kind of line beyond good enough. It's the top chef aspiration. Because if you watch any of those Netflix documentaries like I do, Chef's Table and the like, you know what it means to work in a top chef's kitchen. I mean, first of all, you have this extraordinary bunch of artisans all in the kitchen. They all have their place. They're working as a team. It's clear, it's controlled. There's a way that the team adapts to the seasons and the food that comes in. The menu keeps evolving and changing. It looks beautiful. It's delivered beautifully. There's this seamless flow between the front of house and the back of house. The customers are thinking, this is a pretty amazing experience. And they feel nourished, they feel seen, they feel looked after. They feel like they know when to arrive, when to leave. It's just an amazing experience. And that's kind of the top chef experience, the 9 to 10 experience. So, that spectrum, that bell curve, 1 to 3, kitchen fire, it's chaos. 4 to 5, it's fast food, it's predictable, it's safe, it's hygienic, it's some calories, but you can't have too much of it because it becomes unhealthy pretty quickly, and it's never a human experience. 6 to 8, your local trattoria, delicious, tasty, a tablecloth, you feel cared for, you're going to get a half-decent bowl of pasta, but it's a half-decent bowl of pasta. And that menu has been exactly the same as it's been for 30 years and it hasn't changed much. It's good enough, it's okay, but it's not the top chef experience, the 9 to 10, where you've got amazing food being created by a really incredible team, being delivered in a way that is balletic and beautiful and elegant, and really creating an experience that is both artistic and nourishing at the same time. So where do you fit on that spectrum? I mean, either experiences you've gone through in the past as a person being moved through change, or as a transformational professional as you are now, as you're moving people through change, what's the experience that you're offering up to people? And my bet is there are not many of you in the kitchen fire. And there are not many of you in the top chef end. Most of you are probably somewhere in that middle. And what I hope is you're asking yourself, what I aspire to is to get a little bit better. Because with the kitchen fire, there's a story that change is a battle, change is a losing battle. And I'm not sure that's right. I think that's a myth. And when you move to the fast food experience, there's a different story here, which is like change is a process. It's like getting it done. It's just following the rules. And that can be helpful, but I don't think that's the whole truth either. And when you move to the trattoria, you've got a different story, which is change as a discipline. And that can be really helpful. And, it's a practice. But I think when you get to the top chef, you get to the most interesting metaphor here, which is like change is nourishing, change is flourishing. And what would it mean in your organization if it was a top chef experience where the story was change is flourishing, change is nourishing? So I started the Change Signal project 3 years ago, is when I first started sketching out ideas around this. And of course, the podcast has been going for a year. This is a recording to celebrate the 1 year anniversary. And one of the things that has really changed for me over the year is me understanding what I think are the 3 core drivers of modern change mastery, which is the alternative to change management, which just doesn't work. It's a dead label. And I think those 3 labels are, number 1 is claimed agency. Claimed agency. This sense that there is a willingness within the organization to say, I have some responsibility for this change. And not just responsibility, but skill and willpower for that change. So the real question that this asks is like, how much is change owned throughout your organization? How much is change owned throughout your organization? And there's a deeper dive into that, a spectrum around that, which I'm not going to go into here, maybe for a later episode. But you'll guess that there's a bell curve in most organizations. And in most organizations, there isn't a great deal of claimed agency around change. People look at the change team, or they look at the C-suite, or they look at some particularly responsible managers, and they go, well, they can do the change. We're waiting to be told to do the change. But at the deepest level, with claimed agency, there's just an understood, rooted responsibility that change is part of what I do in my organization, and I'm ready for that. The second driver is a real capacity. And so the question here is, how much more capacity, how much more room do we have for change? And, I think there's just a lot of organizations that never even ask that question. They just assume that there's more room for change. They're in kind of denial about that. The ones that are doing a good enough job kind of carve out capacity for change. But there are few organizations that really have a DNA readiness for change, where there's a constant honing and attuning to say we always have to have capacity for change, because change is always coming. The good old days of us launching a change project and a start and a finish, and then we'll go back to business as normal for a while before we do the next change project. Well, that ship has sailed. Now change is an ever-rolling wave. And just having not only a rooted responsibility around claimed agency, but a DNA readiness for the capacity for change, I think is essential. Then the third key driver is technical excellence. And what we know is that there are just some things that need to get done to help drive change forward. Marketing and comms, L&D, learning and development, training, project management. So the question here is, well, how good are our mechanics? How good are our mechanics of change? And, they range from held together by duct tape to the very best of what 2013 can offer to, I think, at the top end, kind of like 21st century wisdom. It is the best expression of marketing and comms, the best expression of how we know L&D works in organizations, the best expression of what project management can mean and how to be agile and how project management serves the process rather than becomes the tail that wags the dog. And so for you as a transformational leader, as you're thinking about your change experience and trying to move towards modern change mastery, really you're facing these 3 core fundamental questions, which is, when we think of claimed agency, how much is the responsibility for change owned in my organization? When we're thinking about real capacity, we're thinking about how much room is there for more change. And when we're thinking about technical excellence, we're thinking, well, how good are our mechanics at change? And I think, if you can answer really strongly to all three of those questions, that's transformational. I mean, that's getting close to modern change mastery, because I think that's the quest. Transformational leaders like you deserve the sense of modern change mastery, not that you've mastered it, but that you are continuing to refine your capacity and your skills and your wisdom so that you can deliver the change experience that is appropriate for 2025 and beyond. Now, beyond that, beyond those three questions, there's another framework I've been thinking around this. This is the framework I started with many years ago. And I'll just give you a taste of this for now, but I want you to know how I'm thinking about it, because it determines how I think about what guests I invite onto the Change Signal podcast. And so you can imagine, I think there are two types of change, and each one is a pair. The first type of change is just to realize that there's both, on the one hand, individual and team change, and on the other hand, organizational change. And they sound like they're kind of the same because they both have the word change attached to them. But I think what's required to make individuals change their behavior and teams to change the way that they work is really different from what's required to shift and rebuild an organization. In some ways, it's like the way Newtonian physics and quantum physics work. Newtonian physics are all about the physics of big things like apples falling on people's heads. Quantum physics is the physics of really small things, how do molecules work? How does stuff at the micro level work? What's weird and amazing is those two systems don't work well together, but somehow they describe the whole universe. And I think the difference between individual and team change and organizational change is similar. They don't work together. The tactics of one are not the tactics of the other, but somehow they describe the totality of what's required to make change happen in your organization. And the question I have for you, just to leave with you now, is when you think about those two things, org change or individual and team change, which one do you feel you are most proficient at? Which one do you think is most important? Which one do you bias towards? Because they both matter, in honesty. And it's helpful for you to understand which one you're more vested in, more trained in, more skillful in, and therefore kind of which one do you think is most important? Because it will help you just realize perhaps a blind spot or an undeveloped area in your approach to change. So that's the first distinction I want to make between individual and team change and organizational change. And then the second distinction I want to make is the difference between easy change and hard change. And I've talked about this in some of my other books, like How to Begin and The Advice Trap. And this work really draws on the work of people like Ron Heifetz and his work around technical change and adaptive change, and Bob Keegan and Lisa Lacy and their work around immunity to change. Easy change and hard change is my kind of codification in simpler language as a simpler process. To be kind of brief about it, easy change is the stuff that is more trainable, more trackable, more spreadsheetable, more metricable, more manageable, all of that. It's the stuff where you can go, look, there's best practice of this, and we can figure out what the best practice is. So it could be, at an individual level, things like training and building new skills and new habits. At an organizational level, like marketing and comms or project management. I will say, even though I call it easy change, this is done badly so often. I mean, so often. This can be just a miserable experience for the people who are going through this. But it's easy change in that it's kind of above the surface, above the waterline. Hard change is kind of below the waterline. Whereas easy change is direct, this is indirect. Whereas easy change is measurable, this is much harder to measure. This is less tangible. This is more emergent rather than linear. So it's things like power, and it's things like agency, and it's things like structure, things that are harder to pin down, harder to move, harder to make progress on. But these are absolutely things you need to understand to be able to make change happen in your organization. If you imagine individual team change and organization on one axis, and easy change and hard change on another axis, I think there are kind of 3 levers in each of those 4 boxes. I've created a classic 2x2 matrix for you there, a box with a cross in the middle. So I think there are 12 levers. And over the next year or so, I'm going to be digging into each one of those levers and expanding on them a little bit more. So there we go. That's what I've learned in a year. That's what's become codified in a year. In some ways, it's the start of the Change Signal Manifesto. And there's more to come. I'll be working on codifying this further and publishing more of it in 2026. So if you're interested in kind of the deeper read on some of this, do make sure you're part of the newsletter. You'll find that at thechangesignal.com. It's a twice-a-week newsletter, one an article, the other an extract from one of the podcast episodes. I'm also curious to know what, if anything, struck a chord with you in this little episode from me. If something did, if you have some ideas or an insight or aha, or this is a load of old bollocks and I don't believe in it at all, then let me know. I'm curious, genuinely. podcast@thechangesignal.com will get through to me for sure. And if you're looking to give me and Change Signal a birthday present, that's very kind of you. Honestly, the best gift is helping spread the word. So, a LinkedIn post saying huzzah, perhaps, or an email or 3 to some of your colleagues saying, hey, this podcast is good, this episode is good, you should listen to. I really appreciate anything you can do to spread the word. And above all, thanks for doing the work. I am glad you're here.